Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast, your cozy little place to practice real English through real conversations. I'm Anna.
And I'm Jake, and today's topic is one that honestly touches almost everyone at some point, whether it's a small mistake or something that's weighed on you for years. We're talking about how to forgive yourself.
Yes, and I think this might genuinely be one of the hardest things we've covered on this podcast so far, honestly. We're often so much quicker to forgive other people than we are to forgive ourselves.
Exactly, and I think that's such an important thing to name right at the start. Self-forgiveness isn't about pretending something didn't matter. It's about genuinely making peace with your own past in a healthy, honest way.
Today, we're going to cover why self-forgiveness feels so hard, the difference between guilt and shame, practical steps toward forgiving yourself, and how to talk about all of this honestly in English.
And of course, real vocabulary, real role-play conversations, so you can practice your English while working through something genuinely meaningful.
Stick around until the end for our full practice conversation, where we bring everything together naturally.
Let's get into it.
So, Jake, let's start with the big question. Why do you think forgiving ourselves often feels so much harder than forgiving other people?
Honestly, I think it's because we have access to our own inner thoughts and intentions in a way we simply don't have with anyone else. We know every single detail of what we were thinking, which can make us judge ourselves so much more harshly.
That's such an insightful point. And I think there's also something about identity involved too. When someone else makes a mistake, we can separate the action from who they are as a person. But with ourselves, it can feel like the mistake becomes part of our whole identity.
Right, and that connects to a really important distinction we'll talk about more later. The difference between feeling bad about something you did versus feeling like you are fundamentally bad as a person.
Let's talk about a useful phrase here, being your own worst critic, a really common English expression describing how harshly people often judge themselves, far more harshly than they'd ever judge a friend. Honestly, I'm my own worst critic. I hold myself to such a high standard.
Great phrase, and such a relatable, honest one, too. Let's practice using it. Anna, tell me about a time you were your own worst critic.
Sure. Honestly, after making a small mistake at work last year, I replayed it in my head for days, honestly being so much harsher toward myself than my manager or anyone else ever was about it.
That's such a genuine, relatable example. Let's talk about another important idea, the double standard, treating yourself by a much stricter, less forgiving standard than you'd ever apply to someone else. I definitely hold a double standard with myself. I'd never judge a friend this harshly for the same mistake.
Such an important thing to notice about ourselves. And honestly, becoming aware of that double standard is often the very first step toward genuine self-forgiveness.
Let's build our vocabulary toolkit now, since there are so many useful expressions in English connected to guilt, regret, and eventually, self-forgiveness.
Great idea. Let's start with basic phrases for describing the difficult feeling itself. I feel really guilty about it. It's been weighing on me. I can't stop thinking about what I did.
Right. Weighing on me is such a common, useful phrase describing something that sits heavily in your mind over time. That conversation from years ago still weighs on me sometimes.
Let's practice this. Jake, tell me about something that's weighed on you for a while.
Sure. Honestly, a disagreement I had with an old friend years ago still weighs on me sometimes, even though we eventually moved past it.
That's such a genuine example. Let's talk about another useful phrase, holding on to guilt, describing the pattern of continuing to carry a difficult feeling long after the actual event has passed. I think I've been holding on to guilt about this for way longer than I probably need to.
Great phrase, and such an important pattern to notice, since guilt is meant to be temporary, a signal, not a permanent state to live inside of. Let's talk about one more useful phrase, Making peace with something, describing the process of finally accepting and releasing a difficult memory or mistake. I'm still working on making peace with that decision.
Beautiful phrase, and such a genuine description of the whole process we're talking about today. Let's summarize this vocabulary section. For the difficult feeling itself, weighing on me, holding on to guilt. And for the process of healing, making peace with something, letting it go.
Now, let's talk about something really important and honestly, genuinely useful, the difference between guilt and shame, because understanding this distinction can completely change how you approach forgiving yourself.
Great point. Let's define these clearly. Guilt is usually the feeling, I did something bad. Shame is usually the feeling, I am something bad. One focuses on a specific action, the other attacks your whole sense of self.
Right, and that distinction genuinely matters because guilt, when it's healthy, can actually be useful. It points towards something you might want to repair or do differently next time. Shame, on the other hand, often just makes you feel stuck without offering any real path forward.
Let's practice recognizing the difference. Jake, describe a guilt-focused thought about a mistake.
Sure, I made a mistake when I forgot my friend's birthday. That's something I can genuinely learn from and do better next time.
Perfect. Notice how that focuses on the specific action. Now, describe a shame-focused thought about the same situation.
Something like, I'm just a bad friend. I always let people down, which attacks the whole identity rather than the specific action.
Exactly. Such an important, clear distinction. Let's talk about a useful phrase for catching yourself in shame-based thinking, separating the action from the person. I try to separate the action from the person. I made a mistake. That doesn't mean I am a mistake.
Beautiful phrase, and such an important tool for anyone working through self-forgiveness. Let's do a role play, practicing this distinction together. Imagine a friend sharing a mistake and gently helping them separate guilt from shame.
Honestly, I feel like such a terrible person for what I said to my sister last week.
That sounds like it's really weighing on you. Can I ask, do you think what you said was out of character for you, or does it genuinely reflect who you are as a person?
Honestly, it was completely out of character. I was just really stressed and said something I didn't mean.
That sounds more like guilt about a specific moment, not proof that you're a bad person overall. Those are actually really different things.
That's actually really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Perfect example, listeners. Notice how naturally that gentle question helped separate the specific action from a much larger, harsher judgment about identity.
Now, let's talk about some of the common blocks that genuinely prevent people from forgiving themselves, even when they logically know they probably should.
Great point. Let's start with perfectionism, believing that any mistake at all is genuinely unacceptable rather than a normal, expected part of being human. I think my perfectionism makes it really hard for me to forgive myself for anything at all.
Right, and there's a useful phrase connected to this, holding yourself to an impossible standard, expecting flawless behavior from yourself in a way you'd never realistically expect from anyone else. Let's practice. Jake, tell me about a time perfectionism made self-forgiveness harder for you.
Sure, I'll take this one. Honestly, after one small error in a big project, I couldn't let it go for weeks. Even though the overall project genuinely went really well, my perfectionism just wouldn't let me acknowledge that.
That's such an honest, relatable example. Let's talk about another common block, fear of repeating the mistake, believing that if you forgive yourself, you might somehow become more likely to make the same error again. Part of me feels like holding on to guilt keeps me from making the same mistake twice.
Right, and this is actually a common misunderstanding. Genuine self-forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or ignoring what happened. It actually often creates more space for real learning and growth rather than staying stuck in constant self-punishment.
Let's talk about one more common block, feeling like you don't deserve forgiveness, especially if the mistake genuinely hurts someone else. I feel like I don't really deserve to forgive myself after what happened.
Such an important, honest feeling to name, and we'll talk more about this specific block a little later in the episode too, since it's such a common, genuine struggle for so many people.
Let's talk about one final block, comparing your mistake to others, believing your specific situation is somehow worse or more unforgivable than what other people go through. I know other people make mistakes too, but mine feels so much worse somehow.
Great point. And honestly, that kind of comparison rarely reflects reality accurately. It's usually just our own harsh inner critic exaggerating the situation.
Now let's get into the practical part, genuine, actionable steps towards actually forgiving yourself, not just understanding the concept intellectually, but real tools you can actually use.
Great. Let's start with the first step, genuinely acknowledging what happened, without minimizing it, but also without exaggerating it either. There's a useful phrase for this, seeing it clearly. I try to see it clearly, not worse than it was, but not pretending it didn't matter either.
Let's practice. Jake, tell me about seeing a past mistake clearly without minimizing or exaggerating it.
Sure. Honestly, I did hurt my friend's feelings with something I said carelessly. That's true, and I don't need to pretend it didn't matter. But it also wasn't some catastrophic, unforgivable act either.
That's such a balanced, honest example. Let's talk about the second step, taking responsibility, genuinely owning your part in what happened, which we've touched on in our apology episode too. I try to take genuine responsibility without drowning in excessive self-blame.
Right, and there's a nice balance there, responsibility without punishment. Let's talk about the third step, making amends where genuinely possible, which might mean an apology, a changed behavior, or some other meaningful repair. Where I can, I try to make amends, even small ones.
Let's practice. Jake, tell me about making amends for a past mistake.
Sure, I'll take this one. After realizing I'd been really distant with a close friend during a hard year, I made amends by genuinely reaching out, being honest about what happened, and making more consistent effort afterward.
That's such a meaningful, genuine example. Let's talk about the fourth step, extending yourself the same compassion you'd offer someone else in the same situation. I try to ask myself, what would I say to a friend going through this exact same thing?
Beautiful, and honestly, such a powerful reframe, since most people are naturally so much more kind and understanding towards others than towards themselves.
Let's talk about the fifth and final step, choosing to release it, genuinely deciding to let the weight go, even if the memory itself never fully disappears. At some point, I made the genuine choice to release it rather than continuing to carry it forever.
Such an important final step, and honestly, it really is often a conscious, ongoing choice rather than something that simply happens automatically over time.
Let's do a role play bringing these steps together. Imagine a friend working through a genuine mistake, being gently guided through this process.
I still feel so guilty about how I handled things with my old business partner years ago.
That sounds like it's really stayed with you. Can we look at it clearly together? What actually happened without making it bigger or smaller than it really was?
Honestly, I made some decisions without consulting him properly, and that really did damage our trust.
That's a real, honest acknowledgement. Have you had a chance to take responsibility for that directly with him?
I did apologize eventually, though it took me way too long to actually do it.
That still matters, even if it took time. If a close friend told you this exact same story about themselves, what would you say to them?
Honestly, I'd probably tell them it was a genuine mistake, that they took responsibility, and that they deserved to move forward now.
That's such wise, compassionate advice. Maybe it's worth offering that same kindness to yourself, too.
See, listeners, notice how naturally those 5 steps wove through that gentle, guided conversation. Seeing clearly, taking responsibility, making amends, extending compassion, and finally, choosing to release it.
Let's talk about something really important now, a common misunderstanding about self-forgiveness, the fear that forgiving yourself somehow means excusing or dismissing what happened.
Great point, and honestly, this is such a common, genuine concern people have. Let's talk about the clear distinction here. Excusing behavior means saying, what I did wasn't really wrong, or it doesn't really matter. Genuine forgiveness says, what I did mattered, and I'm still choosing to release the weight of carrying it forever.
That's such an important, clear distinction. And honestly, real self-forgiveness usually requires fully acknowledging the impact first, not skipping past it entirely.
Right, there's a great phrase for this. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. I haven't forgotten what happened, and I'm not pretending it didn't matter, but I have chosen to forgive myself for it.
Let's practice this distinction. Jake, describe a situation where you forgave yourself without excusing what actually happened.
Sure. Honestly, I really did let my team down once by missing an important deadline, and I still fully acknowledge that impact, but I've forgiven myself for it too. Both things can genuinely be true at the same time.
That's such a mature, balanced example. Let's talk about one more important point here. Self-forgiveness actually tends to make you more accountable long-term, not less, since shame often leads to avoidance, while genuine forgiveness tends to create space for honest reflection and real change.
Such an important research-backed point too. Honestly, people who can genuinely forgive themselves often show more accountability and growth afterward compared to people stuck in ongoing shame and self-punishment.
All right, time for our full practice conversation, bringing together vocabulary, the guilt versus shame distinction, and the practical steps towards self-forgiveness, all in one natural, honest dialogue.
Let's set the scene. 2 close friends talking over coffee. One of them has been struggling to forgive herself for something that happened months ago.
Perfect. Here we go.
Hey, you've seemed a little distant lately. Is everything okay?
Honestly, not really. I've been thinking a lot about that whole situation with my old roommate. It's really been weighing on me.
I'm really glad you're telling me. What's been going through your mind about it?
I think I just feel like such a bad person for how I handled things back then. I was really unfair to her during a stressful time.
That sounds like it's been sitting really heavily with you. Can I ask, do you think what happened reflects who you genuinely are, or was it more like a difficult moment during a hard period?
Honestly, looking back now, I was dealing with a lot at the time, and I definitely wasn't my best self, but it really wasn't who I am overall.
That sounds more like guilt about a specific situation, not proof that you're fundamentally a bad person. Those are genuinely different things.
That's actually really helpful to hear. Honestly, I think I've been treating it like the second one this whole time.
Have you had a chance to take responsibility for it directly or make amends in any way?
I did apologize a while back, and she was really gracious about it, honestly.
That's such an important step, and it sounds like you've already done real, meaningful work here.
I guess I have. I think I've just been holding on to the guilt long after it was actually needed.
If a close friend told you this exact same story, what would you tell them?
Honestly, I'd tell them they made a mistake during a hard time. They took responsibility, and they deserve to let it go now.
That's such wise advice. Maybe it's time to offer yourself that same compassion too.
You're right. Honestly, I think I am ready to finally make peace with this.
Okay, listeners, did you catch everything in that conversation? Honest sharing, supportive listening, a gentle question separating guilt from shame, acknowledgement of amends already made, and a genuine, compassionate reframe towards self-forgiveness, all completely natural.
Let's break down a few key lines. It's really been weighing on me, a natural way to describe carrying guilt over time.
That sounds like it's been sitting really heavily with you. Can I ask, do you think what happened reflects who you genuinely are, or was it more like a difficult moment during a hard period?
The crucial guilt versus shame distinction.
Have you had a chance to take responsibility for it directly or make amends in any way?
Checking in on genuine accountability.
If a close friend told you this exact same story about themselves, what would you tell them?
The powerful compassion reframe.
See how naturally all these tools weave together in one real, honest conversation? That's exactly the goal for today.
Let's talk about how to support someone else who's genuinely struggling with self-forgiveness, since this connects so closely to everything we've discussed today, but deserves its own dedicated attention too.
Great point. And honestly, this connects back to patterns we've discussed in previous episodes too. Validation first, always, before moving toward any kind of reframe or advice.
Right. Phrases like, "That sounds really heavy to carry," or "Thank you for trusting me with this," go such a long way before offering any perspective at all. Let's talk about a particularly useful tool here, gently asking questions rather than immediately offering reassurance. Questions like, "What would you say to a friend in this exact situation?" tend to land so much more powerfully than simply saying, "Don't be so hard on yourself."
Great point. And honestly, that's exactly the tool we used in our practice conversation earlier too. Since people often already know the compassionate answer, they just need gentle help accessing it for themselves.
Let's practice this. Imagine a friend sharing genuine, ongoing guilt about a past decision.
I still can't stop thinking about how things ended with my last job. I feel like I really let my old team down.
That sounds like it's really stayed with you. Can I ask, can you imagine what you would say to someone you cared about if they told you this exact same story about themselves?
Honestly, I'd probably tell them they did their best with the information they had at the time.
That sounds like really wise, compassionate advice. Maybe there's room to offer that same understanding to yourself, too.
That's actually a really helpful way to look at it. Thank you.
Beautiful example, listeners, showing how gentle questions, rather than direct reassurance, often help someone genuinely arrive at their own compassionate insight.
Let's talk about mistakes now, both language mistakes and communication habits that can unintentionally get in the way of genuine self-forgiveness.
Great point. Language mistake number 1, using permanent identity-based language, like "I am a terrible person," rather than action-based language, like "I did something I regret." This connects directly to the guilt versus shame distinction we discussed earlier.
Right, and this pattern really does matter linguistically too. I am statements attach an identity, while I did statements describe a specific, changeable action.
Good point. Mistake number 2, using absolute words like always or never when describing a mistake, like "I always mess everything up," which usually isn't accurate and makes the situation feel much bigger and more permanent than it actually is.
Great catch. A more accurate version might be, I made a mistake this time, rather than framing it as some kind of permanent, unchangeable pattern.
Now let's talk about a communication mistake, rushing someone towards self-forgiveness too quickly before they've had genuine space to fully acknowledge what happened, which we touched on earlier too, but it's worth repeating here specifically.
Right, timing really does matter. Forgiveness that's rushed often doesn't feel genuine or lasting compared to forgiveness that comes after real, honest acknowledgement.
Third mistake, confusing self-forgiveness with never feeling bad again, when actually some genuine, appropriate remorse can coexist alongside forgiveness, especially for situations that genuinely affected someone else.
Such an important, nuanced point. Self-forgiveness doesn't require erasing all feeling entirely, it just means releasing the excessive, ongoing weight of self-punishment.
Let's go through a quick reference list of useful phrases organized by situation, since this can be really handy for listeners to remember.
Great idea. For describing the difficult feeling, it's been weighing on me. Holding on to guilt, I can't stop thinking about it.
For the guilt versus shame distinction, "I did something wrong," not "I am something wrong," separating the action from the person.
For the practical steps, seeing it clearly, taking responsibility, making amends, extending myself compassion, choosing to release it.
For avoiding the excusing trap, forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. It mattered, and I'm still choosing to let it go.
And for supporting someone else, that sounds really heavy to carry. What would you say to a friend in this exact situation?
That's such a useful toolkit, listeners. Save this list or come back and re-listen to this section a few times until these phrases start feeling automatic.
Let's do a fun role-play marathon. 5 quick scenarios so you can hear these tools used again and again in different contexts.
I love this idea. Let's go fast. Scene 1. Forgiving yourself for a parenting moment you regret.
I lost my patience with my kids yesterday, and I still feel really guilty about it.
That sounds like it's weighing on you. Was that a genuine reflection of who you are or a hard moment during a stressful day?
Honestly, just a hard moment. I was exhausted. It's not who I usually am with them.
Scene 2. Forgiving yourself for a financial mistake.
I made a really costly financial decision last year, and I keep beating myself up about it.
That's such a common thing to carry. Have you been able to take anything useful from it or make any changes since then?
Actually, yes. I've been so much more careful with my budgeting ever since.
Scene 3. Forgiving yourself for missing time with a loved one before they passed.
I regret not visiting my grandfather more before he passed. It really stays with me.
That sounds like such a heavy, tender thing to carry. You were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time.
That does help to hear, thank you.
Scene 4. Forgiving yourself for a friendship that ended badly.
I said some really hurtful things during my last big fight with a friend, and it still bothers me.
That sounds really hard to sit with. Have you had any chance to make amends, even now, years later?
I actually reached out and apologized recently. It felt really good to finally do that.
Scene 5. Forgiving yourself for a health-related decision.
I ignored some symptoms for way too long before finally seeing a doctor, and I still feel guilty about that.
Perfect marathon. 5 completely different everyday situations, and every single tool we've discussed today showed up naturally across them.
Let's do a quick correction round, both grammar and tone this time. I'll read a sentence with a mistake, and Anna, you fix it.
Let's go.
Sentence 1. I am a horrible person because of what happened.
This attaches a permanent identity to a specific action. A healthier version would be, I did something I regret, and I'm working on forgiving myself for it.
Correct. Sentence 2. A grammar issue. I'm trying to forgiving myself for this.
After trying to, we need the base verb, not ing. It should be, I'm trying to forgive myself for this.
Perfect. Sentence 3. I always ruin everything. This proves it.
This uses absolute language that overstates the pattern. A more accurate version might be, I made a mistake this time. That doesn't mean I always ruin everything.
Great fix. Sentence 4. Forgiving myself means what I did didn't matter.
This confuses forgiveness with excusing behavior. A more accurate version would be, what I did mattered, and I'm still choosing to forgive myself for it.
Excellent fix. Sentence 5. I don't deserve no peace after what I did.
This has a double negative issue. It should be, I don't deserve any peace after what I did. Though, honestly, a healthier reframe might be, I'm working on believing I deserve peace even after what happened.
Great job catching all of these, Anna, and great job to listeners who caught them too.
Let's answer a couple of common questions before we wrap up. Jake, what's something learners often ask about this topic?
A big one is, how do I know if I've actually forgiven myself or if I'm just pretending to move on?
Great question. And honestly, genuine self-forgiveness usually feels like relief mixed with continued growth, not complete emotional numbness. If you notice the guilt still comes up occasionally, but it no longer feels overwhelming or identity-defining, that's often a sign of real, genuine progress, rather than avoidance.
That's such a helpful, honest distinction. Another common question, what if the person I hurt hasn't forgiven me or isn't in my life anymore to make amends with? Can I still forgive myself?
Such an important common question, and honestly, yes, self-forgiveness genuinely doesn't require the other person's forgiveness or even their presence. You can take responsibility, learn genuinely from what happened, and still choose to release the weight you've been carrying, even without external resolution.
Great compassionate answer. One more question. Is there a real difference between forgiving yourself and letting yourself off the hook in English?
Good question, and honestly, they can sound similar, but letting yourself off the hook often implies avoiding responsibility altogether, while forgiving yourself usually implies you've already taken genuine responsibility, and you're now choosing to release the excessive weight of it.
Great distinctions. I think that covers a lot of really useful ground today.
Before we recap, let's do one final story, weaving together everything we've discussed today.
I'm ready. Go for it.
Okay. A few years ago, I went through a really difficult period where I made a decision that genuinely hurt someone close to me. And honestly, for a long time afterward, I carried so much shame about it. Not just guilt, but this deep feeling that I was fundamentally a bad person because of it.
That sounds like such a heavy thing to carry.
It really was, and for years I didn't even try to work through it. I just quietly punished myself instead, believing that was somehow the right thing to do. But eventually, a close friend gently asked me the exact question we talked about today. What would you say to someone else who did this exact thing?
That's such a powerful question.
It really was, and honestly, my answer surprised me. I would have told someone else that they made a serious mistake, they took responsibility, they apologized sincerely, and they deserved to move forward and grow from it. I just hadn't been willing to offer myself that same grace.
How did things shift for you after that?
Slowly, honestly. It wasn't instant at all. But I started separating the action from my whole identity. I took real responsibility, made genuine amends where I could, and eventually consciously chose to release the weight I'd been carrying for so long.
That's such a beautiful, honest example, listeners, and it really shows exactly what we've talked about today. Self-forgiveness isn't about pretending something didn't matter. It's about genuinely acknowledging it, taking real responsibility, and eventually choosing to set the weight down so you can keep growing forward instead of staying stuck.
Let's do a few more full-length scenes, this time a little longer, so we can really hear the whole self-forgiveness process play out naturally.
Great idea. Let's start with a scene about forgiving yourself for a career-related regret.
I still think about turning down that job opportunity years ago. Sometimes I really beat myself up over it.
That sounds like it stayed with you for a while. What made you turn it down at the time, looking back honestly?
Honestly, I was scared and I didn't feel ready for that level of responsibility yet.
That sounds like a really human, understandable reason, not some kind of unforgivable failure.
I guess when you put it that way, it really doesn't sound as bad as I've been making it feel.
Exactly. And honestly, you can't fully know how things would have gone anyway. You made the best decision you could with the information and confidence you had at that specific time.
That's such a helpful way to look at it. Thank you. I think I've just been judging my past self through the lens of who I am now.
Beautiful example, listeners, showing how gently reframing a past decision through genuine understanding rather than harsh hindsight judgment can really open the door to authentic self-forgiveness.
Let's do a second longer scene, this time about forgiving yourself for a parenting or caregiving regret.
I feel like I wasn't present enough for my kids when they were younger. I was so focused on work back then.
That sounds like such a tender, heavy thing to sit with. Were you doing the best you could with everything you were managing at the time?
Honestly, yes. I was under a lot of financial pressure back then, and I genuinely thought I was doing right by them by working so hard.
That really does sound like genuine love, even if it didn't look exactly the way you wish it had looked in hindsight.
That's actually really comforting to hear. I think I've just been so focused on what I got wrong.
It's completely okay to wish you'd done some things differently, and also recognize that you were genuinely doing your best with what you knew and had at the time. Both things really can be true together.
I think I needed to hear that. Thank you, genuinely.
Great example, listeners, showing real compassion for a past self who was genuinely struggling and honoring how far that person has come since then.
Before we recap, let's give listeners a few questions to practice on their own, out loud, right now if you'd like to pause the episode.
Question 1. Think of something that's been weighing on you. Try describing it honestly using today's vocabulary without minimizing or exaggerating it.
Question 2. Try asking yourself, is this guilt about a specific action or has it turned into shame about your whole identity? Try separating the action from the person out loud.
Question 3. Try asking yourself the powerful question we used throughout today's episode. What would I say to a friend who told me this exact same story?
Great questions. Let me answer the third one to give an example. Honestly, if a friend told me they'd once said something hurtful during an argument years ago, but had genuinely grown and apologized since then, I'd tell them they're allowed to move forward now. They don't need to carry that weight forever.
That's such a genuine, compassionate example. And notice how naturally offering that same grace to yourself really can shift everything. That's really the final goal here, listeners. Not forgetting, not excusing, but genuinely, honestly making peace with your own past so you can keep moving forward with real compassion for yourself.
Let's cover a few more natural idioms before we recap, because these show up constantly in everyday English when people talk about forgiveness and moving forward.
Great idea. First one, water under the bridge, meaning something from the past that's no longer worth worrying about. It's already happened and can't be changed. Honestly, that whole situation is water under the bridge now. We've both moved past it.
Lovely phrase, and closely related, let bygones be bygones, meaning to intentionally let go of past conflicts or mistakes and move forward without holding on to them. I've decided to let bygones be bygones with that whole situation.
Let's practice a couple of these together. Jake, tell me about a time something genuinely became water under the bridge for you.
Sure. Honestly, a disagreement I had with my brother years ago used to feel like such a big deal, but now it's genuinely water under the bridge. We've grown so much closer since then.
That's such a genuine, warm example. Let's cover one more idiom, carrying the weight of the world, describing the feeling of holding on to an overwhelming amount of guilt or responsibility, often more than is genuinely fair or necessary. I've been carrying the weight of the world over this one small mistake.
Great phrase, and such an honest description of how guilt can sometimes grow far bigger than the situation actually warrants. Let's talk about one more. Give yourself some grace, a warm, gentle way of encouraging self-compassion specifically. Try to give yourself some grace. You were doing your best with what you knew.
Let's do a final quick role play using some natural idioms together.
Honestly, I've been carrying the weight of the world over something that happened years ago. It's exhausting.
It sounds like it might genuinely be time to let bygones be bygones and give yourself some grace about it.
That's true. Honestly, it really is water under the bridge at this point. I think I've just been holding on to it out of habit.
Perfect natural use of several idioms together, listeners. Exactly the kind of warm, gentle vocabulary that makes conversations about forgiveness feel a little more comfortable and human.
Let's take a quieter moment before our final recap and talk about how self-forgiveness can look different depending on the specific situation, since the core principles apply everywhere, but the details can shift quite a bit.
Great point. Let's talk about forgiving yourself for a relationship mistake first, which often involves genuine amends with the other person alongside your own internal process.
I've worked on forgiving myself for how I handled that relationship alongside actually apologizing to her directly.
Right, and let's talk about forgiving yourself for a professional mistake, which often involves separating your overall competence from one specific error.
I've had to remind myself that one mistake at work doesn't erase years of solid, genuine performance.
Great example. Let's talk about forgiving yourself during a health journey, like regretting past habits that affected your well-being.
I've worked on forgiving my past self for habits I didn't fully understand were harmful at the time.
Such an important, compassionate point. And let's talk about one more situation, forgiving yourself as a parent, which often carries such uniquely heavy emotional weight.
I've had to work on forgiving myself for moments I wasn't the parent I wanted to be, while also recognizing how much I've grown genuinely.
Beautiful examples across every situation, listeners, showing that no matter what specific area of life feels hardest to forgive yourself for right now, the same core tools we discussed today, seeing clearly, taking responsibility, extending compassion, and choosing to release it, really do apply universally.
Before our final recap, let's spend a little more time on something important, understanding self-forgiveness not as a single one-time event, but as an ongoing practice, since that framing genuinely helps a lot of people.
Great point. And honestly, I think a lot of people expect self forgiveness to happen once, completely, and then never think about the situation again. But realistically, it often comes in waves, especially for bigger, more significant mistakes.
Right. There's a useful phrase for this. It's a process, not an event. Forgiving myself for that whole situation has genuinely been a process, not something that happened all at once.
Let's practice this. Jake, tell me about a time self forgiveness felt more like an ongoing process than a single moment.
Sure. Honestly, with a bigger regret from years ago, I've had to keep returning to that same compassionate reframe again and again. Some days it feels fully resolved. Other days, the old guilt quietly resurfaces, and I just have to gently walk through the process once more.
That's such an honest, genuine example. And I think it's really reassuring for people to hear too, since it removes the pressure of needing to forgive yourself perfectly or permanently in one single attempt.
Great point. And let's talk about a related idea, the guilt visiting, not staying. A gentle way to think about moments when an old feeling briefly returns, without it meaning you failed at forgiving yourself. Sometimes the guilt still visits occasionally, but it doesn't stay the way it used to.
Beautiful phrase, and such a comforting way to reframe those occasional difficult moments as brief visits rather than permanent relapses. Let's talk about one more important idea here: tracking genuine progress over time rather than expecting the feeling to disappear completely and immediately.
Right, and there's a useful way to check this, comparing how a memory feels now compared to how it felt a year ago, or even just a few months ago. Honestly, thinking about it now feels so much lighter than it did even 6 months ago.
Let's practice this. Jake, tell me about how a specific memory has genuinely felt lighter over time for you.
Sure, I'll take this one. Honestly, a mistake I made early in my career used to feel completely overwhelming whenever I thought about it. But now, years later, it barely crosses my mind at all. And when it does, it feels so much smaller and softer than it used to.
That's such a hopeful, genuine example. And I think it's such an important note to end on before our recap, listeners. Self forgiveness really doesn't need to feel complete or perfect right away. It's genuinely, authentically an ongoing, gentle practice, one that tends to get a little lighter, a little easier each time you return to it with real compassion.
Beautifully said. And honestly, that patience with yourself throughout the whole process is really just as important as any single step we've talked about today.
Let's cover one more practical tool before we wrap up, something we've touched on in past episodes too, in different forms: writing yourself a letter, specifically as a self-forgiveness exercise.
Great idea. Let's walk through a simple structure listeners could genuinely use for this. First, describing what happened honestly, without minimizing or exaggerating it, just like we discussed earlier. I made a decision that hurt someone I cared about, and I've carried guilt about it for a long time.
Right. Second, naming the context and circumstances without using them as excuses, but as genuine understanding. I was going through a really difficult period myself at the time, though that doesn't erase the impact of what happened.
Third, acknowledging what you've learned or how you've grown since then. Since then, I've become so much more thoughtful about how my actions affect the people I care about.
Fourth, extending genuine compassion to your past self. I know you were doing the best you could with what you understood and had available to you at that time.
And finally, a closing statement of release. I choose to forgive you, and I choose to let this weight go so we can keep moving forward together.
Let's read that whole reflective letter together as one piece. I made a decision that hurt someone I cared about, and I've carried guilt about it for a long time. I was going through a really difficult period myself at the time, though that doesn't erase the impact of what happened. Since then, I've become so much more thoughtful about how my actions affect the people I care about. I know you were doing the best you could with what you understood and had available to you at that time. I choose to forgive you, and I choose to let this weight go so we can keep moving forward together.
That's such a complete, genuine piece, and notice how naturally it flows through everything we've discussed today. Honest acknowledgement, context without excuse, genuine growth, real compassion, and a conscious choice to release the weight.
This is honestly such a powerful exercise for listeners, both for genuine emotional processing and as meaningful English writing practice, too. Try writing just 4 or 5 honest sentences like this about something that's genuinely been weighing on you.
And remember, you don't need to share this letter to anyone at all. It's simply for you, a quiet, private, genuine act of self-compassion. All right, let's recap everything from today's episode.
We started by exploring why self-forgiveness often feels so much harder than forgiving others, and named the common pattern of holding ourselves to a much harsher double standard.
We built our vocabulary toolkit, phrases like weighing on me, holding on to guilt, and making peace with something.
We covered the crucial distinction between guilt and shame, I did something bad versus I am something bad, and why separating the action from your identity matters so much.
We talked honestly about common blocks to self-forgiveness: perfectionism, fear of repeating mistakes, feeling undeserving, and unfair comparison to others.
We practiced 5 genuine practical steps towards self-forgiveness: seeing it clearly, taking responsibility, making amends, extending compassion, and finally, choosing to release it.
We also talked about the important difference between genuine self-forgiveness and simply excusing harmful behavior, and how to support someone else through this same process too.
If you remember nothing else from today, remember this. Self-forgiveness doesn't mean pretending something didn't matter. It means genuinely acknowledging it, taking real responsibility, and choosing, again and again if needed, to release the weight so you can keep growing forward with real compassion for yourself.
Such an important, gentle reminder. And listeners, just like always, practice really is the key here. Try asking yourself today's powerful question this week. What would I say to a friend who told me this exact same story?
And if something you're carrying feels really heavy, please remember, talking to a therapist or counselor can genuinely help too. Today's episode is really about language and reflection. Real support is always worth reaching for as well.
Beautifully said. All right, everyone, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, practicing your English.
We'll see you next time, right here for more easy English conversation practice.
Take care and keep speaking.
Bye, everyone.